Um, Perfect. Wonderful. So in the first part of this webinar, we'll be going through some of the background of the Technical Assistance Award competition that we're talking about here. And we do want to make sure that we leave ample room for discussion and questions. So my message here is twofold. Please feel free to send any messages or questions by the chat function or Q&A function in the webinar here while Charlotte and I are talking. And also we will be maintaining maybe 20 or 30 minutes toward the end of the webinar for a longer Q&A session. Before I introduce Charlotte, I will kick us off with a video from Scott Stubb, the Assistant Secretary for Career, Technical, and Adult Education at the Department of Education.
Hello, I'm Scott Stump, Assistant Secretary for the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education here at the United States Department of Education. It's my pleasure to welcome you and thank you for joining this webinar to introduce the 2020 Catalyzing Career and Technical Education through Pay for Success competition. You know, at Octave, we believe that high-quality career and technical education, or CTE programs, are more important than ever to help students transition successfully into a labor market and economy that has been greatly affected by COVID-19. We are delighted to support Social Finance and JFF in administering this competition, providing technical assistance and supporting the expansion of effective CTE programs. We look forward to receiving applications from Perkins-eligible CTE sites who are interested in using outcomes-based financing to scale their services. Best of luck in the competition.
Excellent.
Hello.
Wonderful. So by way of introduction, again, my name is Kyle Dorn. I'm the Director of Advisory Services at Social Finance up in Boston, where we are currently enjoying probably the last warm day of the year. And I am joined on this webinar by two colleagues, Meredith Siegel and Narni Summerall, who will likely pipe in at one point or another throughout the conversation today. And I will kick it to Charlotte.
Hi, everyone. Charlotte Cahill with Jobs for the Future. So I, very briefly speaking, lead our National College and Career Pathways and CTE work, and very happy to be talking with you all today.
Great. Today, we will be, as I mentioned at the top, covering essentially all of the information applicants need to apply to the competition. I will note that we have had two webinars prior to this webinar, and those webinars, the difference between this and the others is we'll be focusing perhaps a little bit more on the nuts and bolts of Pay for Success, as well as what an outcomes payer is. And then we also want to be leaving a bit more time for Q&A, knowing that a number of you have had a chance to participate in the previous webinars. And I should note that you can also find those webinars up on the competition website at socialfinance.org/octave. With that in mind, I can take us to a quick overview of the competition itself, which we are thrilled to be hosting with JFF. Ultimately, we'll be selecting up to 2 CTE sites that are interested in exploring Pay for Success financing to scale up high quality CTE programming. The winning applicants will receive free technical assistance, which is valued at $150,000 to $225,000. So I want to underscore that this is a technical assistance award rather than a monetary award. In this technical assistance, we'll first be conducting a feasibility study to assess the potential for using innovative outcomes-based funding and financing to scale up career and technical education. And then we would be moving into developing a project to scale services if that's deemed feasible. And of course, this competition and project overall is supported by a generous grant from the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education at the U.S. Department of Education. We'll dig into each of these competition details a little bit more later in the webinar, but to give a quick overview, Eligible applicants here is a very key piece. We're looking at eligible applicants who are local CTE sites or local education sites providing CTE programming. And they must be Perkins eligible. The lead applicant must be Perkins eligible. We are strongly encouraging applicants to be partnering with an entity that is interested in paying for improved outcomes. Obviously, nothing needs to be fully baked by the time an application needs to come together, given that the technical assistance is for feasibility rather than finalizing a project. And then in proposals, applicants will need to describe the program, the targeted outcomes that they're looking for, and the target population. Thankfully, the target population is also defined in the RFP as high need and underserved youth. In terms of, let's see, I guess in terms of the timeline here, I'll note that the RFP was initially released in August. The letter of intent to apply was due on October 16th, and that was notably an optional letter of intent to apply. And the applications themselves are due on December 4th in about a month. So now we'll go into a background of us quickly. Social Finance is a national nonprofit that helps our partners transform systems to focus on measurable and equitable outcomes. We work with government, service providers, and capital markets, and have offices in Boston, Austin, Texas, and San Francisco. We started in 2011 and have focused on a variety of pay-for-success tools or outcomes-based funding. And this is everything from outcomes rate cards to career impact bonds to social impact bonds, which I'll touch on in a few slides. We also help our partners focus on the component pieces of pay for success that in many cases need to be pulled apart and worked on individually, either to get a jurisdiction or entity ready for a social impact bond or another tool, or to shore up services to create maximal impact generally. We work across a number of issue areas and have found CTE to be ripe for pay for success for a number of reasons that we'll be getting into shortly. In terms of how we think about the elements that go into designing pay for success and implementing pay for success, we think about it in three buckets, sometimes sequential. First, assessing and identifying strategies, and this and the next bucket really form the foundation for what we would be providing in the technical assistance award. So this is everything from cost benefit analyses to making sure we're keeping the lens of the target population front and center throughout the design of this project. We help folks develop and implement performance pricing standards. We help folks think about how to braid public and private capital. And then importantly, the performance management pieces are critical to successful pay for success projects. So we found that to be a necessary and important component of our work. And in terms of the collaboration points down below, we often work with partners that span sectors and agencies and do what it takes to serve as a connective tissue for collaboration across the board. And Charlotte can speak to the JFF side of things.
Yeah, so we too are a national nonprofit organization, and our mission is focused on supporting economic advancement for all Americans by really working to align and transform the education and workforce development systems. So we work with partners across the country to design and scale innovative solutions in education and workforce development. And then we also work to influence policy in the national conversation and to invest capital in innovative new solutions. Next slide, please. And so we too have 3 offices. Ours are located in Boston, Oakland, and Washington, D.C. And there are about 150 of us total. Next slide, please. And so we really look to achieve 3 strategic priorities, or really 3 kinds of impacts simultaneously. And so we focus both on, or simultaneously, on helping individual people advance, on supporting the development of and growth of inclusive regional economies, and on redesigning the education and workforce development systems to make all of that happen. Next slide, please. And we've been thinking some about what all of that means and looks like in the context of the current pandemic, and have really focused on how we get to a recovery that is equitable for all Americans. And so, as part of that thinking, we've identified kind of 5 key levers that we see as really critical to this work. So those are, working to, in the short term, connect those who are unemployed to opportunities. We're also thinking about what are policy solutions needed to build an equitable economic recovery. I'll put in a very quick plug here for our equitable economic recovery transition plan for the Biden administration that we released yesterday. So it's on our website. Encourage you all to check it out. We're also thinking about mobilizing corporate leadership as part of this work, leveraging technology to do this work better, not just in our current virtual environment, but really looking ahead to the future as well. And as a sort of longer term play in all of this, thinking about what it means to reimagine education and workforce development. Next slide, please. So, what does all of that look like as we think about working with partners across the country to design and develop high quality CTE programs? And so, wanted to give you just a few examples of the kind of work that I am doing on a day-to-day basis with a larger team here at JFF. So, we work with local leaders to ensure that CTE programs are aligned with their regional labor markets. So we help analyze labor market information, identify competencies and skills needed by employers, and think about how to bake those into CTE programs. We help folks ensure that they are aligning with all of the Perkins 5 requirements, and really sort of going beyond aligning even and thinking about how to leverage Perkins 5 to really use it to build out high quality programs, rather than thinking of Perkins 5 as a big thing that you were required to comply with. So we also help develop CTE programs of study with a big focus on dual enrollment and dual credit as key components of high quality CTE programs, and aligning across secondary and post-secondary education. Work-based learning is another core component of high quality CTE programs, and we've been doing lots of work recently helping people think about how to design high quality virtual work-based learning opportunities. Employer engagement and figuring out legal and liability concerns are sort of perennial topics of interest that we help partners across the country think through. And then finally, it's very difficult to build a high quality CTE program without engaging stakeholders from across sectors. And that's something that is true too of how we are thinking about this competition. And so you'll be hearing more about that throughout this webinar, but wanted to highlight that helping folks think about how to really engage leaders from across sectors in doing this work is definitely part of the TA that JFF provides. And with that, I will turn it back over to Kyle so that he can talk a little bit more about Pay for Success.
Wonderful. So let's start with what Pay for Success is shooting for. So at the broadest level, Pay for Success we consider to be an umbrella term for funding and financing that focuses on outcomes rather than just outputs. So thinking job placement and growth rather than just enrollment in a particular CTE program, for example. Why we're excited about Pay for Success as a model for expanding access to high quality CTE programming is that it focuses all parties on the outcomes that they care most about and ensures that we're measuring these outcomes in a meaningful way so that we know that the program is working as intended and can incorporate that ongoing performance management that I referenced to ensure its success. Pay for Success can attract new private and public funding sources to scale up services that we know work and achieve better outcomes for individuals. And it ensures that service providers have access to patient longer-term capital over maybe 5 or 6 years that allows them to focus on scaling their programs and providing them in order to best meet the needs of the target population. And then this last point here, it helps direct government dollars to programs that work. When we think about the types of projects that are best suited for Pay for Success, there's some crossover with the type of technical assistance that we'll be providing, of course. So on this slide, you'll see the main work streams or areas that we focus on in our feasibility studies and feasibility technical assistance. This is all supported by the notion that Pay for Success is not a good fit for everything. So during feasibility, we'll look at 6 main areas. Start by identifying the target population to benefit from the services, and in this case, we have a fairly broad definition of the population, in terms of high need, underserved youth, and this will be further refined during the feasibility phase. In terms of program model and impact, in this case, we're looking to applicants to propose an intervention during the application stage. And Charlotte in a little bit will touch on how high quality CTE is defined, and also to provide some details on the evidence behind the program and its impact. And then in addition to working closely with the service provider to understand the intervention, its evidence-based, and the organizational capacity to scale services, we'll develop an initial cost-benefit analysis of the program, as well as a financial model to inform future Pay for Success project structuring. And this, of course, will build on administrative and programmatic data on the target population, and the impact of the intervention and the values of the outcomes that the intervention brings or program brings, and then the cost of providing services. And then as toward the last thing that we'll focus on in this feasibility phase, or also which aligns with the projects that are best suited for Pay for Success, is support from potential payers, whether governments or private or individuals, to participate in a Pay for Success project. And so I'll touch on that a little bit more on the next slide. But where we would come out of the feasibility phase is with a recommendation on whether or not to move forward with developing a Pay for Success project, and could come out with potential funding strategies, an analysis of local labor market needs and trends, evaluation of promising practices such as remote learning that's more relevant to all of us now than ever, and potential design for data collection and analysis strategies. All of these, of course, still supporting the overall Pay for Success structure. So as with any field, Pay for Success and how folks understand the term has evolved over time. Pay for Success can be best understood as a suite of strategies that shift the focus from outputs to outcomes. And so within that, we've taken stock of what's changed and what hasn't in Pay for Success. And the 4 core principles at the top here are what we've observed as standard over the years. So first, outcomes that are clear and that each of the parties involved in the project care about. Second, data that supports decision-making and is not extraneous. Third, cross-sectoral partnerships, whether they're common or uncommon. And fourth, accountability and governance, having a good structure, essentially. On the bottom here, each of these principles support a number of different strategies, Pay for Success strategies that could be employed. These are not exhaustive or comprehensive, but give a sense of the different structures that can be used in Pay for Success. So at the upper, or I guess with social impact bonds, this is where you see governments paying impact investors if a given outcome is met. Prevention funds, where philanthropy can help governments pay for outcomes. Outcomes rate cards, this is where prices are set for outcomes as they're achieved in service delivery. Career impact bonds, a student-friendly income share agreement where students pay for career success. And then an employer pair model where similarly employers are paying for success. And so throughout each of these is the concept of paying or an outcomes payer. In the application for the competition, we asked that applicants identify a potential outcome payer. Obviously, as Charlotte said at one point, it need not be signed in blood, but basically having a sense of somebody or an entity that is interested and willing to at least join the conversations, we've found to be very important in the application phase. And so the language that defines an outcomes payer is broad. An outcomes payer can be really any entity that agrees to pay for a predetermined outcome metric when and if that metric is achieved. And that's measured, of course, by an independent evaluator. So if the project successfully improves outcomes, the payer repays impact investors who covered the upfront costs of expanding services, plus a modest return. If the program doesn't achieve its targeted results, then the outcomes payer would pay less or sometimes may not pay anything. And so when we think about what is an outcomes payer, it can be a public or a private entity, but most commonly we see that it's a state or local government entity. And we've gotten a number of questions about how to identify an outcomes payer throughout this application process. And so to do that, the sort of general guidance we give is that applicants should consider the level of government that would most benefit from the potential outcomes that are to be achieved, and the level of government that most cares about those outcomes, so benefit and impact. This is, of course, an area where the applicant yourself would have the greatest knowledge, having the relationships of all of those that you work with on a day-to-day, week-by-week, or month-by-month basis, and then also a network of entities to gauge where value is accruing. So a few examples of outcomes payers include a state government, such as the Department of Education or Department of Labor, that's committed to improving high school graduation rates or employment outcomes for the target population. That's one option. Another is a city or county government, such as the local education agency, Department of Education, or Office of Management and Budget. Third, a nonprofit or other private entity, such as an employer or institution of higher education that may benefit from a more skilled workforce or more prepared student. And then finally, an individual participant in a program can also be an outcomes payer. This would be through a career impact bond, where a portion of the cost of tuition is paid if the student successfully gains employment. So that's a little bit more detail on the potential outcomes payer. It's where a lot of the creativity of Pay for Success comes to the front, and happy to engage further in any questions as they come up. So now I can turn it to Charlotte to describe a bit of the competition.
Sure. So wanted to quickly frame out for you sort of, and I know we already had one question about eligibility in the chat, but who is an eligible applicant for this competition? And so eligible applicants are local CTE sites, and you can see in the fine print on the slide that there is a sort of federal definition for that, that we're happy to kind of dive into with you. But essentially, local CTE sites need to be meeting a set of 4 criteria. So one is that they should be providing high quality evidence-based CTE programs, and we'll talk more in just a minute about what constitutes a high quality CTE program, but there should be some kind of program already in place, and high quality CTE programs are complicated. And it may be that you don't have all of the elements in place, or are hoping to use this as an opportunity to build out, say, work-based learning. And, I think that there are opportunities for that. And there should be, you should have some sort of CTE program in place as part of your application. Now, those high quality CTE programs should be serving underserved high need youth, which are defined in the RFP. Um, Sites should be eligible for Perkins funding. Whether it's certainly fine to, again, the question, if sites are already receiving Perkins funding, and we would in fact anticipate that most sites would already be receiving Perkins funding, although that is by no means the requirement. The requirement is simply for Perkins eligibility. So that could be either, a K-12 school or district, or it could be a community college, or it could be a consortium of Perkins eligible entities, or you may have other, in your particular state and context, other Perkins eligible entities that are also then eligible for purposes of this competition. And finally, as Kyle was saying, applicants should preferably apply with the support of a potential payer. Next slide, please. So here's, when we say high quality CTE, here's what we mean. We are using a set of criteria established by Octay. And so high quality CTE programs should be supporting career pathways that are aligned with labor market demand. They should be providing students with information about the labor market demand so that students are able to make informed choices about their careers. Pathways should offer students opportunities as applicable to earn industry recognized credentials and lead to post-secondary degrees and certificates, as well as offering students at the high school level opportunities to earn post-secondary credit through mechanisms like dual enrollment. Students in high quality CTE programs should gain not just technical skills aligned with the labor market, but also employability or 21st century skills and core academic skills as well. High quality CTE programs incorporate work-based learning, which is a critical way that students can build those skills beyond the classroom and serve and provide equitable access for underserved populations. And with that, I will turn it back over to Kyle.
Great. So let's see, on this slide, applicant structures, of course, can look very different, but the overall goal is to expand high quality CTE through Pay for Success. And the way that we're going to do this is by selecting up to 2 sites, and then for each of those sites, working through the 2 phases that I mentioned, feasibility and transaction structuring, which are discussed a little bit more on the subsequent slide. Let's see, so starting on the left-hand side of this diagram, this is a diagram of how a Pay for Success project might come together. You'll see the orange dotted box, which signals where this competition, the technical assistance awarded through the competition, will be focused. The reason landscape studies fall outside of this is because the issue area is already decided upon when the application comes together. And so the landscape study is less needed. As we get to feasibility, the second chevron from the left in the slide will assess the potential for using Pay for Success financing to address the specific issue in a particular geography, and this can take anywhere from 4 to 5 months. And then with that completed and all of the project partners committed to moving forward with developing a Pay for Success project, we would move into the transaction structuring phase or project development phase, which can take anywhere from 5 to 6 months or more. This includes the work needed to develop a Pay for Success project and launch services, which would be the execution, which would then lead to the execution phase on the right-hand side of the diagram. In terms of roles and responsibilities, as I mentioned, the feasibility study will likely take around 5 months and does require significant inputs from the service provider and project partners. And this is very much a collaborative process. So this could include providing programmatic data, participating in likely virtual site visits to share information about the program, intervention and landscape, and then participating in regular working group meetings and ongoing decision making. Pay for Success project development depends, the timeline depends on a number of factors, including the level of engagement from project partners, how available administrative data and capacity building might be, and then a willingness and readiness to make decisions about the Pay for Success project. Let's see, we consider this award to be a good opportunity to really learn how Pay for Success works and how to put a Pay for Success project together, and get to know other project partners in the community. But we do want to underscore that it is a real-time commitment from each project partner. We want to give a few very quick examples of some potential structures. Here on this next slide, these aren't the only structures that are available, as I mentioned earlier, when talking about the range of potential outcomes pairs. But in this example, just to bring to illustrate what we're talking about, in this example, a school district and their State Department of Education would apply together to your question, Anne. They identify the program that they both want to scale, in this case, a career academy model that the district has already piloted, and also identify who they're planning to serve and what outcomes they want to achieve. The school district is the provider, or in the parlance of the award, of this competition, the local CTE site. And the State Department of Education applies as the potential outcomes pair that'll dedicate resources to pay for improved outcomes. Notably, again, the State Department of Education doesn't have to be the only outcomes payer. They could share a portion of the cost with the district, for example, or bring in an employer who's interested in improving graduation rates. But in order to apply, we do encourage applicants to have at least one potential outcomes payer identified. This next example is an example of an employer payer. So this is where a company would be willing to pay if a Pathways collaborative expands to high schools near the company. It might be one way that might happen. And then we wanted to give a very quick example, and we can come back to these if it's of interest to folks, but I wanted to give a quick example of a career impact bond, which focuses specifically on upskilling low-income and underserved learners, and may also fund wraparound supports and has student-friendly terms. In this instance, the technical college or a technical college is a lead applicant and should have knowledge that students have interest in this type of arrangement in a career impact bond. This can be through maybe a survey or some other awareness that students are willing to pay and participate in a career impact bond. And then with regard to the application itself, I can turn back to Charlotte.
Sure, thank you. So just to walk you through a little bit more about what we're looking for in the applications. So the required materials are an executive summary, which is exactly what it sounds like it would be. So just about a page summarizing your proposal. And then for the proposal narrative, I'll talk through in a minute kind of these different elements of the proposal narrative, but would say just at a high level for right now that these word counts are very genuinely intended to make your lives easier rather than more difficult. And so recognizing that for each of these components, it would be possible to write very much more than we have here in terms of a word count. And as somebody who works for a nonprofit, I have written a grant proposal or two in my time and recognize that sometimes it can be like, well, I could write a whole book about that, should I? I don't know. And so really wanting to signal to you kind of the quantity and level of detail of the information that we're looking for in these proposals. So hope that is helpful. Trying not to ask for too much in terms of a really long narrative that is very time consuming to write. And then for the appendices, looking for, first of all, letters of support from all of the partners, as well as, again, like this, statement from a potential outcomes payer. Um, and then if you have any past assessments or evaluations of your program, we would be very eager to see those. And we recognize that it is simply not the case that all high quality CTE programs have assessments or evaluations that have been conducted. So that is optional, but if you have it, please do include it. Next slide, please. And then these categories that you see here on the slide are aligned with the different components of that proposal narrative. And we just, wanted to talk through a little bit more about what we're hoping will be included in your proposal under each category. So for the rationale, really looking to better understand what you expect will be the impact of the program, including sort of quantifiable goals and the number of participants you anticipate reaching, as well as how all of this work is going to benefit underserved high need youth. For the partners and policy section, again, for both Pay for Success and high quality CTE, it's critical to have those cross sector partners. So we're eager to see what stakeholders are engaged and kind of what record of collaboration might exist already around the proposed program. The payer commitment, Kyle has already spoken to. I am anticipating that there may be more questions on that, on the role of the payer. So we'll say for now that, again, we'd love to see a little bit of a description of what the payer's commitment and why they are interested in this project. Program quality is where you can really sort of dig into questions about how you're thinking about uh, the evidence base for your program, as well as any sort of evidence that you have collected regarding assessments or evaluations and estimated costs of the program. Provider capacity and commitment is the part where you can tell us about how wonderful your CTE program is, and you sort of help us to better understand what the CTE program currently looks like and how it is being implemented currently. And finally, I know I said this earlier, but I genuinely believe it, and I'm going to say it again. This is complicated work, and we understand that, and are really looking for, in this challenges and risks section, your assessment of what are possible challenges as you think about doing this work, and some of the possible risks. I think those are things that we will be eager to think through with selected sites. And so just are really interested in hearing your initial thinking about what those challenges might be. Next slide, please. So going to keep this really fast. You have joined the third and final webinar about this. These will all be posted on the competition website that is, for which the URL is here on the slide, and the proposal deadline is December 4th at 11:59 p.m. Pacific time. You will see. So if, like me, you are both a night owl and live on the East Coast, like, by all means, submit your application at 3 a.m. But please do get those in by December 4th, and we're looking forward to reading them. And with that, I think we'd love to open it up for questions.
And please feel free to type your questions into the chat box, as folks have been doing. There was one question that came up from Aubrey that I believe we haven't answered yet in the chat function. The question was, can you give guidance on how to find and approach a potential outcomes payer? And here I'd underscore that, you know, the threshold that we're looking for is interest from a potential outcomes payer. An all-out commitment would be wonderful, but frankly is not possible without a better understanding of what the actual pay for success structure is composed of. And so when you're thinking about a potential outcomes payer, the questions, the most applicable question, it really revolves around who is accruing value, basically who benefits from the outcome that you're aiming for. So if your program is serving as a pathway to a large local employer, for example, they may be open to conversations about serving as an outcomes payer. Similarly, in terms of outcomes for that are most relevant to a state Department of Education or a state Department of Labor. Every individual site is going to know best what relationships you have and what other entities are benefiting from the program that you run. And so a little bit of this is a very creative enterprise. But Charlotte, I guess I wonder if you have any other further reflections on this search for an outcomes payer.
I think you've covered a lot of it. I would, you know, maybe just add that I think that there are two questions that I would ask myself if I were looking for an outcomes payer for my CTE program. And the first is, who benefits if this program succeeds? Number one. And so that could be, for example, an employer, and it could be who's going to get a skilled talent pipeline based on this high quality program. It could be, to Kyle's point, a state Department of Education that, you know, recognizes CTE as an effective way of increasing high school graduation rates, which, you know, all SCAs out there are looking to do, as far as I'm aware. So one question is, right, who else benefits if this program succeeds, and might they be a payer? And then the second question is really about, you know, what relationships you already have with, you know, if you can kind of get a list of entities that might benefit from this going, then the next question is, what relationships do we have with those entities? And so who might it make sense to approach? So do I have a really terrific engaged employer on my industry advisory board for my CTE program? Might I approach them? You know, do I have a strong relationship with my state CTE director, or with the State Department of Labor, or with the state apprenticeship agency? So I think all of those you know, different payers are possible. It's really sort of a matter of, you know, I think thinking through your partners and then determining who might be interested. And I'm seeing Anne's question in the chat as long as I'm talking here about Perkins plans, and which I'm happy to take a stab at answering. Yes. This competition is itself, right, being funded by Octay. And so perhaps not surprisingly, it is designed absolutely to align with Perkins and with the Perkins requirements and the Perkins planning that you already have done. So please don't reinvent any wheels on that.
And Aubrey, in terms of your, Aubrey had a question about, given that the economy is tight right now, asking a partner if they're interested in paying for this program could be touchy, obviously. So are there sectors or payers who are more likely to have the funds to do such an activity? The first thing I'd highlight is that pay for success comes in many forms and doesn't necessarily mean that an outcomes payer is paying for the entirety of a program. Not to get too far into the weeds, but there's one of the variables that exist within pay for success programs or projects is contingency. So basically the level of funding that goes into, that is contingent on a program achieving its desired outcomes. And so that means that there are varying levels of funding that are tied to outcomes, and you can have, as I don't know what the floor is necessarily, but you could have a minimal amount of funding that effectively serves as bonus payments on top of a pre-existing program funding structure. And that does help to scale the program, but may be a more achievable ask from an outcomes payer. Any other reflections there?
So I think that one other thought I might add is, particularly if you were looking at sort of public entities, whether that's a state or local government that might be a payer, something that I've seen in my work with those entities is precisely because the economy is tight right now, they're also doing a lot of thinking about how best to allocate their funds. And that does include looking to think about sort of innovative new models for doing so. And so I do think that there is some appetite among those public sector entities for thinking about things like this. And then in the, as you look to the private sector, I would say, I think that we have seen some employers that we work with in the field. And so I would say that I've seen this in both manufacturing and IT, are actually more worried than ever about their talent pipelines in particular. And they're sort of looking at a labor market that's been really disrupted by the pandemic, and are thinking about precisely these issues. And one of the things I've been hearing from school districts and colleges that I work with is, so we have this, tech employer who's been a really great partner, except suddenly they won't leave us alone, and they're so anxious about getting all of this work done. And so I think that in some cases, it is the case that employers are really eager to think about how to do more of this work. So so all that is to say, I hear you on the economy is tight, and I think that there are some folks who are really eager still to dive in and think about this as a way of dealing with the problems that they're encountering right now.
I believe we are caught up on questions, so please feel free to lob any more in on the chat function, or if we happen to miss your question, I humbly ask that you paste it back in there. And we have about 9 minutes left, but can end early if there isn't anything else. Okay, well then I will say thank you to everyone for participating and joining us this afternoon and morning for our West Coast friends and Mountain Time friends. Please feel free to access socialfinance.org/Octay. We have a Q questions and answers document that's up on the website there. The RFP is up there, of course, and we have a few other resources that may be helpful as you're putting your application together. one last time, the application is due on December 4th at 11:59 p.m. Pacific time. And we really hope to see your application there. Please let us know if you have any further questions. We would possibly be able to incorporate them into the questions and answers document.
Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thanks so much. Here's a question. When are the winners announced? Let's see, I believe it's January 25th, if I'm remembering correctly from the RFP. And so basically the application will be submitted by December 4th, 2020. And then there will be about a month or month and a half of review of applications and an interview with the applicants themselves. It's also possible that there would be a virtual site visit if additional information would be helpful as we're finishing the review of applications. And I was incorrect, as Narni is correcting me right now. The selections will be announced on January 29th rather than January 25th. Okay, thank you everyone. And again, please feel free to visit the website and reach out by the email address on there if you have any questions, and we would update the questions and answers document accordingly. Have a wonderful rest of your week.